Since early November of 2023, law enforcement in Citrus County, Florida, had been searching for 39-year-old Stacy Usher. The woman was a convicted felon in Citrus, Manatee, and Pasco counties, where she had a history of grand theft, fraud, and obtaining property by a worthless check, among other offenses. In November, the Citrus County Sheriff's Office started circulating Usher's mugshot and accompanying charges on social media as its warrant of the week. She was wanted for violating her parole by selling fentanyl and using a two-way communication device. Usher's flight from justice came to a crashing end later on in November when deputies found her hiding between the cushions of a couch. A photo of the arrest was posted by the sheriff's office on their Facebook, showing Usher being pulled out by a deputy after she'd tightly wedged herself inside the couch. It remained unclear if the photo had been taken at her home or elsewhere. Number 8. David Flores. A shooting suspect was arrested in the summer of 2023 following a poor attempt to disguise himself and evade arrest during a standoff with a New Mexico SWAT team. In December of the previous year, the Albuquerque Police Department responded to a shooting at a Foothills residence where an unnamed victim was found with a gunshot wound to the leg. The latter identified the shooter as David Flores, who was at the time wanted for failing to appear in court on shoplifting and controlled substance charges. In early August of 2023, Flores was tracked down by agents from the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office to a residence at Mission Hill Apartments on Menor Boulevard Northeast. The Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office SWAT team responded to assist in the arrest after Flores had refused to leave the residence. After a standoff lasting several hours, Flores tried to sneak past law enforcement by disguising himself as a woman. His plan faltered and photos from the scene showed him being taken into custody while wearing makeup, a wig, and a pink tank top. Number 7. Shawn Miller. Since April of 2016, American man Shawn Miller had been wanted by the ATF after being indicted on charges of possession of heroin with intent to distribute in Massachusetts. He was part of a wider investigation into the Naughty Block street gang, and at least a dozen other gang affiliates were named in the indictment with drug trafficking and firearm charges. The gang was believed to have been responsible for a significant amount of the heroin that was moved in the Cape Cod area. On August the 18th of 2016, the Yarmouth Police Department surrounded a house on Cape Cod where they believed 31-year-old Miller had been hiding out. They asked the occupant to come out and discovered he was an elderly man and apparently not the person for whom they had been looking. He wasn't arrested until one of the officers noticed there was something off about the man's eyes. Upon closer inspection, law enforcement discovered that it was actually Miller who donned a realistic old man rubber disguise. A neighbor who watched the consequent arrest take place later told New England Cable News, "I've never seen something like that before. That's someone who really knows what they're doing." Inside the home where Miller had been hiding, the police also found nearly $30,000 in cash and 2 loaded guns stashed in a laundry basket. Number 6. Stephen Schuler. Law enforcement in Monrovia, Indiana, arrived at the home of 44-year-old Stephen Schuler in the spring of 2015 to execute a warrant on a probation violation. The warrant was reportedly related to previous charges for intimidation and domestic battery. Upon reaching the residence, deputies from the Morgan County Sheriff's Office were met by Schuler's ex-wife, who told them that the man wasn't home. Law enforcement didn't enter the property and came back the following day. When the woman revealed that she knew Schuler's whereabouts, Captain Brent Worth later recalled the ex-wife saying, "He's not going to be happy, but he's trapped in the wall and we need your help." Deputies learned that Schuler had forced himself through a narrow hole in the attic floor near the chimney and then lowered himself down a 6 to 8 foot drop. The wanted man remained in the 16-inch wide hiding place for more than a day as he was no longer able to climb out. The police asked for help from the Monroe Township Fire Department, and firefighters used a chainsaw to cut open a part of the roof and reach Schuler. He wasn't hurt during the process, and once freed, he was taken into custody. Number 5. Incident in Miami Gardens. In 2023, the owner of iRepair Tech, a cell phone repair shop located at a plaza in Miami Gardens, Florida, sent footage to local law enforcement of a bizarre break-in that occurred at around 4 a.m. on June the 3rd. It showed an unidentified man smashing glass displays and stealing phones while wearing a box on his head as a disguise. The thief was ultimately able to make off with an estimated $8,000 in cash and 19 iPhones. During the heist, as he was rummaging through the store, the thief briefly lifted the box off his head, clearly exposing his face for the cameras. After the owner called Miami Gardens police, officers located the suspect in the same plaza, drinking at a liquor store with several companions. He was taken into custody without incident. Number 4. Sheila Bingham. On October the 26th of 2023, Sheila Bingham sped away from law enforcement during a traffic stop in Oklahoma City. Bingham had her daughter in the car at the time and had reportedly claimed that the child was having a medical emergency. She pushed her Kia SUV to high speeds during the ensuing chase, which came to an end at a gas station near Memorial and Bryant. Bingham appeared to be in the process of using the pumps when she told an officer who'd rushed towards her, "I don't know why you're following me around." Then, as the officer attempted to restrain her, Bingham yelled, "Don't put your hands on me." Bingham, who was wearing a tie-dye Led Zeppelin t-shirt, gripped her steering wheel with one hand as an officer pulled on her arm and said, "Dude, I'm not getting out." Aerial shots of the arrest showed Bingham being handcuffed and escorted to a police vehicle by 3 officers. She was taken into custody on multiple charges while her daughter, who was supposedly having a medical emergency, was reported to be fine by law enforcement. Number 3. Jenifer Porter. 27-year-old Jenifer Porter of Fort Smith, Arkansas, wreaked havoc on the streets of Sebastian County on May the 5th of 2020. Porter had been caught speeding 100 miles per hour in a stolen Dodge pickup truck when law enforcement initiated a traffic stop, to which the woman refused to comply. As reported by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, Porter damaged 3 state police vehicles and tried to force another driver off the road during her vehicular rampage. One of the incidents was captured on a pursuing deputy's body cam, and he was initially heard telling the police dispatcher, "She's got a gun in hand." Seconds later, Porter reversed the pickup truck into the police cruiser, rendering it inoperable. The deputy got out and pointed his gun at Porter, but the woman drove off, and he quickly returned to the cruiser to call for backup. Porter was eventually stopped by Arkansas State Police on US Highway 71 after an officer made contact with the stolen pickup's bumper, causing it to spin out and come to a halt. After she was taken into custody and led to the back of a police vehicle, Porter seemingly tried to downplay the gravity of her actions by saying, "I mean, look, I really didn't intend on all of this distraction. I'm just going through a lot right now." The charges would include felon in possession of a firearm, felony fleeing, theft of a vehicle, and 8 counts of aggravated assault. Today's topic was requested by Aaron P. Cully. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Incident in Spokan. In the summer of 2018, the Spokan Police Department in Washington uploaded the photo of a suspect found hiding in a dryer to its social media, and the post went viral. Officers had initially gone to the apartment after being tipped off that a domestic violence offender might violate a protection order and return to his victim's home. Upon reaching the address, the police spotted the suspect, but he ran into the apartment and refused to come out. A canine unit named Murphy helped track the man down. Body cam footage showed him peering out from inside a dryer that was sitting atop a washing machine. In its post, the police department quipped, The adult version of hide and seek never turns out well for anyone. Internet users commenting on it also had their fun. As one wrote, "I'll bet he now has a laundry list of charges. He's totally washed up now." While another joked, "Well, he won't feel cramped in a jail cell." We'll line up our previous vids about people who thought they'd gotten away with it right after number 1. Stay tuned if you'd like. Number 1. Edward Martin. The photo of a man hiding out while the police was actively searching for him went viral in the summer of 2015 after it was uploaded to Imager and then picked up by Reddit. On July the 31st, law enforcement in Grand Rapids, Michigan went to a home in the 600 block of Lafayette Avenue Northeast to find Edward Martin, aged 25. The latter was sought on domestic dispute charges. A pair of officers was on the porch of a blue shingled house, and someone from across the street took a picture of Martin as he was lying on his side on the roof, directly above the officers. The original uploader captioned the image, "They've been looking for him for 10 minutes. While many users were quick to jest about the officers' haplessness, the Grand Rapids Police Department later revealed that Martin was spotted when they began setting up a perimeter around the home. He was ordered off the roof and taken into custody. Sergeant Terry Dixon later stated that he hoped whomever was responsible for the viral post had also called the police and not merely taken the photo. Number 7. Thomas Darnell. At about 3 a.m. on March the 17th of 1983, a deputy of the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office in Texas noticed a fire burning in a wooded area while he was out on patrol. The officer approached the flames, whereupon he discovered that a young woman's naked body had been set ablaze. An autopsy determined that the victim, who was still unidentified at the time, had been abused by her killer before being fatally strangled. The FBI was later able to identify the corpse as belonging to Laura Purchase, a missing woman from Houston. Only months after her body had been discovered, self-proclaimed serial killer Henry Lee Lucas submitted an unprompted confession to her murder. Lucas was ultimately convicted of the crime in 1986, but following his incarceration, he rose to infamy after it emerged that he'd falsely confessed to upwards of 600 other murders, causing many unsolved cases to be closed and inaccurately attributed to him. The man ultimately died of congestive heart failure in 2001, but prior to his death, he'd recanted most of his confessions with the exception of his mother's slaying in 1960. 24 years after Purchase's murder, the Montgomery County Cold Case Squad resubmitted the still unidentified perpetrator's DNA to the FBI, officially eliminating Lucas as a potential suspect. Then in October of 2019, the DNA was sent for genealogy testing, leading investigators to 75-year-old Kansas man Thomas Darnell. The latter's DNA was positively matched to the suspect's, resulting in his arrest on a charge of capital murder in May of 2021. Number 6. David Swift. Wife and mother of 4, Karen Johnson Swift, disappeared on October the 29th of 2011 after she'd attended a Halloween party at the Dyersburg Country Club in Northwest Tennessee. She was officially reported missing the following day, and local authorities subsequently set an extensive search effort into motion. During the course of their investigation, Dyersburg police learned that the missing woman's husband, David Swift, had been the last person to see her prior to her abrupt disappearance. That information, coupled with the fact that Karen had filed for divorce from David just 3 weeks earlier, immediately made him a person of interest in the case. Then on December the 10th, roughly 6 weeks after Karen had initially gone missing, a body was found buried in a cemetery about 2 miles from her house. The Dyer County Sheriff's Office thus reclassified the case as a homicide investigation, and they worked tirelessly over the course of the next 10 years to identify the perpetrator of Karen's killing. Although all circumstantial evidence pointed to David as the likely suspect, there simply wasn't enough to charge him. That all changed in October of 2019 when Dyersburg police officially concluded their investigation and turned all evidence over to the office of the District Attorney General. who reviewed the information before presenting the case to a grand jury in the summer of 2022. More than a decade after Karen's slaying, the Dyer County Sheriff's Office announced that her husband had been indicted by the grand jury and was charged with premeditated first-degree murder. On August the 8th of 2022, David, who by that time had remarried and moved to Alabama, was taken into custody by members of the DCSO, with assistance from members of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in his new home state. Number 5. Jade Benning. California police were called to an apartment in Santa Ana in the early hours of January the 4th of 1996 after receiving reports of a fatal home invasion. Upon their arrival, officers were told that an African-American man had broken into the house at about 3 a.m. and proceeded to stab 22-year-old resident Christopher Hervey to death. The victim's girlfriend, Jade Benning, who was reported as having lived in the apartment with him, recounted how she'd witnessed a physical struggle between him and the alleged suspect. She further claimed that the assailant, after murdering Hervey, had slashed her right hand before fleeing out the back door. In the wake of the incident, the Santa Ana Police Department was unable to identify any suspects that fit Benning's description of the intruder. In 2001, Benning reportedly moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, and the case ultimately went cold. Nearly 25 years later, the police decided to revive their dormant investigation into Hervey's death after receiving an anonymous letter that implicated Benning in the crime. The woman had been interviewed by detectives during the preliminary stage of the investigation, as neighbors had claimed to have heard a contentious argument from inside her apartment on the night of the supposed home invasion. She wasn't initially charged, but that all changed in May of 2022. After consulting with forensic experts, Santa Ana police were able to collect enough evidence to obtain a criminal complaint, and a $1 million warrant was then issued for Benning's arrest. The 48-year-old woman was taken into custody at her new residence in Austin, Texas. As of the case's latest updates, Benning was still awaiting extradition back to California, where she'd likely stand trial for murder. Number 4. Shelly Susan Thompson Lemoyne. On April the 14th of 2005, Texas woman Carolina Tajeda went to her elderly parents' home in Cleveland, located about 45 miles northwest of Houston, to make them lunch. Upon her arrival, Tajeda knocked on the front door, but neither of her parents answered, so she assumed they were still asleep. She then went inside, at which point she stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Her father, 80-year-old World War II veteran Antonio Rodriguez, was lying lifelessly on the floor, while her mother, 77-year-old Lutz Rodriguez, was found dead in the master bedroom. It was later determined that both victims had been beaten and strangled to death. Police dogs tracked the scent of the suspect to a nearby apartment complex, but that failed to generate any actionable leads. Blood that was believed to have belonged to the couple's attacker was also found on a rug inside the home. The authorities uploaded the DNA to the FBI's combined DNA index system, known as CODIS. But the sample wasn't matched to anyone in the database, and the case consequently went cold for several years. The investigation broke new ground in March of 2021 when CODIS finally found a match for the suspect's blood collected at the crime scene. The police revealed that the DNA had been linked to 41-year-old Shelly Susan Thompson Lemoyne, who at the time was incarcerated in a Texas state prison for an unrelated drug offense. Although Thompson Lemoyne denied having any involvement in the Rodriguez couple's murder, she was arrested outside her parole office in July of 2022 after having recently been released from prison. As of recent updates, investigators were still trying to determine Thompson Lemoyne's motive for the grisly double homicide. Number 3. Christopher and Candace Valadez. Kansas college student German Claricki was officially reported missing to local authorities in February of 2010 after his mother hadn't heard from him for several days. Less than a week later, the 19-year-old's body was discovered in a mud-caked culvert east of Augusta, and it was subsequently determined that he'd been fatally shot. The victim's missing vehicle was eventually found in North Wichita about 5 months later. Claricki's murder case experienced little progress over the course of the next decade. But in 2021, the police uncovered information that prompted them to renew their efforts in the investigation. While officials didn't publicly reveal the nature of the newfound information, it was reported that newly discovered evidence led them to identify Christopher and Candace Valadez as the case's prime suspects. The couple, who resided in Simpsonville, South Carolina, had reportedly been in their early 20s and living in Wichita at the time of Clarice's death. In August of 2022, Christopher and Candace were booked into a South Carolina jail, pending their extradition back to Kansas to face charges of murder. Although the police didn't indicate what they believed to have been the couple's motive for the killing, rumors had surfaced back in 2019 that Clarice had gotten involved in illegal activity after mixing with the wrong crowd at Cowley County Community College. Number 2. James Watkins. 37-year-old Christine Monroe was accosted while jogging on the south side of the Sacramento River Trail in California on June the 24th of 1995. According to subsequent reports on the matter, the assailant proceeded to assault and murder the mother of 4. 2 years later, a convicted felon allegedly admitted to the crime, but there was no evidence to support his confession, and the case ultimately went cold for the next 24 years. In late 2019, however, a Redding Police Department detective began reviewing Monroe's case again, and the following January, he resubmitted the woman's fingernail scrapings to the FBI. Through analysis performed with DNA technology that hadn't existed at the time of the initial investigation, the scrapings hit a potential match in June of 2020. The sample was reportedly linked to Texas man James Watkins, who was in the midst of a 14-year prison sentence for robbery. At the time of Monroe's murder, then 17-year-old Watkins had been living with his aunt and uncle and had several run-ins with Redding police for relatively minor crimes. By the time he moved to Texas 2 years later, he'd already compiled a rap sheet that included assault, burglary, and bank robbery. On October the 21st of 2020, Watkins was flown to Redding, where he faced assault, kidnapping, and murder charges. If convicted, he reportedly faced the likelihood of a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 1. George Sver, Brian Gray, and Candice Carter. California teen Edgar Martinez was sleeping in his bed in the late evening hours of March the 27th of 2005 when he was suddenly struck by multiple gunshots fired on the street outside his Antioch residence. It was reported that Martinez passed away as a result of the critical injuries he'd sustained. In the incident's aftermath, investigators worked to ascertain what had precipitated the young man's untimely demise. However, they had very little information to go on, and so the case went cold for the next 15 years. Then in early 2020, the Antioch Police Department announced that they'd identified and arrested 3 individuals believed to have been responsible for the shooting that claimed Martinez's life. The first suspect, 39-year-old Candice Carter, was served a high-risk arrest warrant in the city of Pittsburgh and taken into custody on January the 30th. A few days later, on February the 3rd, 35-year-old George Sver was arrested in connection to the case, followed by Brian Gray, also aged 35, the next day. As was detailed in the arrest reports, the police had ultimately concluded that on the night of the deadly incident, Carter had gotten into an argument with a group of men whom she believed to be rival gang members. Later that night, the woman, along with Sver and Gray, returned to the area of the confrontation and fired multiple rounds into Martinez's apartment. It was determined, however, that the teen had played no part in the initial dispute and hadn't even been the assailant's intended target. They were actually looking for his cousin, a member of the rival gang involved. Antioch police credited advancements in technology as well as tips from the community with solving the 15-year-old cold case. Carter accepted a plea deal with prosecutors and was consequently put away for 13 years. In April of 2021, Sver and Gray pleaded guilty to reduced charges of manslaughter and were sentenced to 14 years in prison each. Number 7. Lori Shaver. In February of 2018, a man contacted the Lake County Sheriff's Office in Florida about a friend of his named Michael Shaver, whom he hadn't seen in person for over 2 years. Deputies were sent to Shaver's home near Clearmont, where they were met by his wife, Lori. She reportedly told them that the last time she'd seen her husband was roughly 3 years prior, when he'd left her and their kids. The officers requested to search the premises with cadaver dogs, but Laurie refused and told them to come back with a warrant. Less than a month later, deputies returned with the aforementioned document in hand. It granted them the authority to scour the Shavers' property with detection dogs and ground-penetrating radar devices. It didn't take long for law enforcement to find Michael's body, which had been buried 3 feet beneath a concrete fire pit in the backyard. A medical examiner subsequently conducted an autopsy on the remains, and it was determined that Michael had suffered a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, several months to several years prior to being found in the shallow grave outside his house. Following an investigation into the matter, Laurie was taken into police custody in September of 2020. The woman, who'd taken the surname Filmer after remarrying in 2016, insisted that she was in no way involved in her former husband's death and pleaded not guilty to a charge of second-degree murder. Many of the victims' friends and family members have continued to receive messages from Michael's Facebook account even after his death. Prosecutors put forward the argument that it was actually Laurie who'd kept up the communications in an attempt to cover up the murder. She'd also drained Michael's bank accounts and sold off many of his possessions in the weeks after she'd allegedly killed him. As of recent updates on the case, a start date for Laurie's trial hadn't yet been scheduled. Number 6. Frank Freshwaters. While speeding down an Akron roadway on July 3rd of 1957, Ohio man Frank Freshwaters fatally struck a U.S. Army veteran. He subsequently pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years at the Ohio State Reformatory, a prison famous for being featured as the titular facility in the acclaimed 1994 film The Shawshank Redemption. Freshwaters reportedly exhibited good behavior at the reformatory and was quickly able to gain the trust of prison officials. In order for him to serve the remainder of his sentence, he was transferred to the Sandusky Honor Farm, a minimum security facility in Perkins Township. In September of 1959, however, Freshwaters escaped from the Honor Farm under circumstances that have never been disclosed to the public. He spent the next 56 years as a fugitive from justice, but was on the verge of being taken back into custody in 1975. The authorities in Kanawha County, West Virginia, had found Freshwaters living under an assumed name and arrested him. However, the state's governor ultimately declined to extradite him back to Ohio, and he was released. Freshwaters remained undetected for the next 4 decades until an investigation into his whereabouts was reopened by a U.S. Marshals Cold Case Unit in northern Ohio. The authorities determined that Freshwaters had been living somewhere near Melbourne, Florida, and they ultimately arrested him without incident at his live-in trailer. It was discovered that the man had obtained a Social Security card under the name William Harold Cox, which he'd used to seek work as a truck driver and a mobile librarian. Following a brief stint at the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, Freshwaters was released on parole in June of 2016. Number 5. Jerry Hearn. In 2013, the authorities in Oklahoma City began investigating a man named Kenneth Watson, who for the better part of a decade had been residing in a house in the 2300 block of Northeast 23rd Street. Watson lived with his girlfriend and was reported to have publicly claimed to be a retired police officer. One of his neighbors would later tell investigators that she'd always been somewhat suspicious of the man, given that he almost never left his house. On April 1st of 2013, FBI agents arrived at Watson's home to arrest him. It subsequently emerged that the individual known as Kenneth Watson was actually a 53-year-old fugitive named Jerry Hearn. The man was wanted in Arizona in connection to several crimes committed in the summer of 2003. Hearn's spree reportedly included him robbing a bank, 2 restaurants, and a convenience store. In early 2013, the FBI received a tip that Hearn had assumed the identity of Kenneth Watson, a man who'd moved out of Oklahoma in 2003. Upon his arrest, Hearn was extradited back to Arizona, where he faced charges of armed robbery and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Number 4. Joseph and Lara Selders. 21-year-old Blaze Wright Jr. was fatally shot in the head during an attempted burglary at his apartment in Universal City, Texas on February 2nd of 2007. An eyewitness claimed to have seen a man fleeing from the apartment following the shooting. Before the bystander had a chance to positively identify him, however, he'd gotten into a gold car and was driven away from the scene. The Universal City Police Department launched an investigation into the murder, but it failed to generate any actionable leads for more than a decade. Then in July of 2020, after the case had gone cold for 13 years, investigators broke new ground in their efforts of identifying a potential suspect. A Universal City detective had been sifting through the case's evidence files with a Texas Ranger. Together they realized that a woman depicted in a previously created composite sketch closely resembled an individual by the name of Lara Selders, who'd been a person of interest in the case but was never interviewed by the police. 34-year-old Selders was subsequently brought in for questioning, at which point she allegedly confessed to serving as the getaway driver for the burglary that had resulted in Wright's death. A second suspect named as Joseph Selders was arrested a short time later after being identified as the person who'd shot the victim. Lara maintained that she was unaware that Joseph had killed Wright until she saw her composite sketch on the news a few days later. Nevertheless, both she and the alleged shooter faced capital murder charges in the wake of their arrests. Number 3. Sarah Panitz. Born to a wealthy family from northeast England, Sarah Panitz was eventually recruited by a notorious gang of tax criminals that was led by Jeffrey Johnson. Panitz worked alongside a group of duplicitous companies that bought inexpensive tax-free cell phones from overseas countries. The devices were then illegally sold in the United Kingdom for a considerable profit. An investigation conducted by the HM Revenue and Customs Department led to the gang's 18 members getting arrested and brought to trial at Kingston Crown Court on fraud charges. Panitz received an 8-year jail sentence herself. However, in May of 2013, she absconded from justice prior to the conclusion of her trial. Panitz remained on the run for the next several years, leading to her being named as one of the UK's most wanted fugitives, thus becoming the first woman to have ever been placed on the list. In late February of 2022, Panitz was located in the small Spanish town of Santa Barbara. Government officials in Spain reported that local police had tracked her down before, in 2015, prompting her to flee once again. In the wake of her second flight from justice, she'd changed her physical appearance and cut off all communication with family members. Investigators eventually received a tip that she'd been hiding out in Santa Barbara, and she was ultimately taken into custody while walking her 2 dogs. As of the latest updates on the matter, the National Crime Agency had already set extradition proceedings into motion in order to bring Panitz back to the UK. Number 2. Nicole Rice. On June the 4th of 2007, Anita Knutson's father went to her apartment in Minot, North Dakota, after she hadn't been answering phone calls or showing up to work for a couple of days. When he arrived at his daughter's residence, the man came upon her lifeless body lying face down on her bed. He called the police, who in their examination of the scene found a pocket knife coated with dried blood. Knutson's death was officially ruled a homicide by stab wounds that had caused her to bleed out. Police records indicated that the victim had last been heard from in the early hours of June the 3rd when she'd sent a text message to her friend. From the onset of the investigation, Minot detectives considered Knutson's roommate, Nicole Rice, to be a person of interest. Although she told investigators that she was out of town at the time the murder was committed, Rice was one of only a few individuals that had keys to the apartment she shared with Knutson. This aspect would have made it possible for her to get into the home without rousing suspicion. Law enforcement officials also learned that there had been considerable tension between Rice and Knutson in the weeks and months prior to the latter's murder. The case went cold for a number of years due to a lack of evidence, but Minot police continued to receive numerous tips that suggested Rice might have been the killer. A man who dated her for several months reported that after getting belligerently drunk at a party, she'd admitted to fatally stabbing Knutson. Investigators also found inconsistencies in Rice's alibi for the night of the murder, as she'd been seen at a bar during the time period in which she'd claimed to have been at her family's farm. After re-interviewing multiple people with knowledge pertinent to the case, Minot police issued a warrant for 34-year-old Rice's arrest in March of 2022, and she was charged with 1 count of murder. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place the following month. Number 1. Sheila Keene Warren. On the morning of May the 26th of 1990, Florida woman Marlene Warren heard a knock on the front door of her upscale Wellington home. Upon opening the door, Warren was met by an individual wearing a clown costume, an orange wig, and white face paint. The unannounced visitor handed her some flowers and foil balloons before abruptly pulling out a handgun and shooting her in the face. The assailant then fled the scene in a vehicle, leaving Warren in critical condition in her doorway. Investigators initially postulated that the attack, which resulted in Warren's death at the hospital several days later, might have been carried out by Sheila Keene, who was identified as Warren's love rival. As was gathered from interviews with friends and relatives, Keene had been having an affair with the victim's husband.
giving her a clear potential motive for wanting to eliminate her. Several years after Warren's killing, Keene married the slain woman's husband and officially took the name Sheila Keene Warren. Although the police long suspected that the latter might have been responsible for the murder, they didn't have enough evidence to arrest her for nearly 3 decades. The situation would experience a dramatic shift in 2017 when advanced DNA technology allowed forensic analysts to test a piece of hair that had been found in the killer's getaway vehicle. It was determined that the hair belonged to Keene Warren, who was arrested in Virginia, where she'd been living with her husband, Michael Warren. After she was formally charged with the murder, her trial was scheduled to begin in June of 2022.
Thanks for watching. Assuming you'd have the minimal items to ensure your survival, would you rather spend 24 hours locked in a trash container or buried alive? Let us know in the comment section below.